In this video, we're going to study Aesop's fable of Jupiter and the Camel. This fable is studied in Lesson 2 of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy's Aesop's Fables course. What we'll do in this lesson is we'll read through the fable from beginning to end, and then we'll talk about the details so that we can understand the real message of this fable and the benefits that we can gain from it for use in our own life. So let's read together Jupiter and the Camel. The camel, once upon a time, complained to Jupiter that he was not as well served as he ought to be in the means of defense and offense. The bull, said he, has horns, and the boar has tusks, and the lion and tiger, formidable claws and fangs that make them feared and respected on all sides. I, on the other hand, have to put up with the abuse of all who choose to insult me. Jupiter angrily told him that if he would take the trouble to think, he would see that he was endowed with qualities shared by no other beast, but that, as a punishment for his unreasonable importunity, henceforward his ears should be shortened. This is the fable of Jupiter and the Camel. Now, the first question I always ask students to consider is why Aesop chooses the characters that he does in the fable. And we see that there are two characters, the camel and Jupiter. But there are some other characters mentioned as well, a bull, a boar, a lion, and a tiger. What we have is the camel as the main character of the fable. And what do we know about camels? Camels live in desert areas, and they're used as service animals. We can call them pack animals. Men use them for transportation or to carry loads through the desert because the camel is designed to be able to walk for long distances and carry heavy loads in desert places where there's no water. So they're very special animals, and they can serve man in a very special way. And that makes the camel very valuable to men. So the camel is an animal that has an important role to play in the world, in the service of man as a pack animal in a desert area. And there's no other animal that can do what the camel can do. But we can understand that to the camel, it seems like a pretty boring job, carrying loads through the desert. And so the camel, looking at other animals, envies the lives of other animals and complains about it, complains to Jupiter, who we can think of as God. But if we look at the animals that the camel actually compares him to, we can see that they have something in common. He compares himself to 4 animals: a bull, a boar, a lion, and a tiger. And if we look at these animals and ask, what do these animals have in common? First of all, they're violent and dangerous animals. And secondly, these are animals that injure man. The bull, the boar, which is a male wild hog, the lion, and the tiger. Normally, if a man encounters one of these animals, he's likely to kill him. The bull is only kept because it's needed for breeding or for butchering on the farm. The boar, as I said, is usually wild, and men hunt them for meat, so they kill them. And then the lion and the tiger are simply wild animals that, if encountered by men, will be shot and killed. There's no real purpose in the life of men for lions and tigers. It seems that God created them to live in the wild. So the camel compares himself to these four animals, which really aren't friendly to man. And yet the camel was created by Jupiter to serve and be a blessing to men. But the camel doesn't like his lot in life, and so he complains. He wishes that he could be like these other animals, and he tells us what he likes about them. He says, I wish that I could have the horns or the tusks or the claws and fangs that these animals have, that make them feared and respected. That's what the camel envies or admires in the lives of the bull, the boar, the lion, and the tiger. The camel wishes that he was feared like these other animals. And so he complains to Jupiter. And Jupiter, who in this fable is like God, the creator, who made the camel the way he did to serve his own purpose, becomes angry with the camel for complaining. We read that Jupiter angrily told him that if he would take the trouble to think. And we see here the cause of most complaining in our lives. Most of the time, people who complain don't think about what they're complaining about. They complain because they feel a certain way or they're frustrated by something, and instead of taking time to think through all the details, control their feelings, and act reasonably, they just let their complaining come out instead of thinking. And so Jupiter becomes angry with the camel and criticizes him for not thinking about what he's saying. Jupiter says, if you would take the trouble to think, you would see that you are endowed with qualities shared by no other beast. So Jupiter tells the camel that it's not that he doesn't have any qualities, or that these other animals have qualities and he just doesn't have them. He has different qualities that allow him to do different things and serve a different purpose. And if he would take the trouble to think, he would see that he was given unique powers, or we like to say gifts, that would allow him to have a certain purpose in life and maybe not be feared by others, but be valued by others because he's useful, because of those unique gifts and qualities that he does have. And then at the end of the fable, we read that Jupiter, as a punishment for his unreasonable importunity or his foolish complaint, punishes him with ears that are shortened. So he gets his ears shortened as a result of his complaining. So not being content with what he had, Jupiter took away from him even something that he did have, and maybe made him even less respectable by shortening his ears. So we have here the fable of Jupiter and the camel. So why would Aesop choose the camel? Well, because the camel serves a purpose in the world That's not maybe satisfying to someone who's prideful and selfish, someone who doesn't think about God's will, wouldn't be content or happy with the life of a camel. Seems pretty boring, just working, carrying loads, serving others in a difficult place to live, a desert. That doesn't seem like a lot that many people would be happy with. And so the camel is used as the complaining animal. And then the animals that he envies are sort of independent, wild, strong, feared and respected animals. Maybe we can look at them and say, boy, I wish I was like a lion, and I wish everyone respected me, and I wish when I roared, everyone was afraid of me. But we have to think about that, like Jupiter says. Take time to think about that. What are you actually asking? You're asking to be feared rather than valued? That really doesn't make any sense. Jupiter actually gave the camel qualities that allowed him to be loved and valued by men and taken care of by men. Whereas these other animals, these feared and violent animals, are killed and hunted and chased off by men. Why would anyone want to be like those animals? It doesn't make much sense. And most of our complaining doesn't make any sense. If we would take trouble to think about things, we would learn that we shouldn't complain, that God is actually good to us and puts us in the best situation for us. To comment on this fable, I'd like to read something written by St. Alphonsus Liguori from a book that he wrote titled Uniformity with God's Will. This simple little paperback book. Uniformity with God's Will. In chapter 5, he writes a little piece that I believe perfectly explains the fable of Jupiter and the camel. St. Alphonsus Liguori writes, "Let us not lament, let us not complain. If we suffer from some natural defect of body or mind, from poor memory, from slowness of understanding, from little ability, lameness, or bad health, let us not lament if we suffer from these things. What claim do we have, or what obligation is God under to give us a more brilliant mind or a more robust body? Who has ever offered a gift and then lays down the conditions upon which he will accept it? Let us thank God for what, in his pure goodness, he has given us, and let us be content with the manner in which he has given it to us." And here's the important point. He said, let us be content with what God has given us in his pure goodness, and let us be content with the manner in which he has given it to us. Who knows? Perhaps if God had given us greater talent, or better health, or a more personable or attractive appearance, we might have lost our souls. If God had given us greater talent, better health, a more attractive appearance, we might have lost our souls. Great talent and knowledge have caused many to be puffed up with the idea of their own importance. And in their pride, they have despised others. How easily those who have these gifts fall into grave danger to their salvation. How many, on account of physical beauty or robust health, have plunged headlong into a life of sin? How many, on the contrary, who, by reason of poverty or infirmity or physical deformity, have become saints and have saved their souls, who, given health, wealth, or physical attractiveness, had lost their souls. Let us then be content with what God has given us. But one thing is necessary, and it is not beauty, not health, not talent. It is the salvation of our immortal souls. Again, these are the words of St. Alphonsus Liguori in a little booklet titled Uniformity with God's Will. And we see there that the saint clearly teaches the lesson that Aesop is teaching in the fable of Jupiter and the camel. God is concerned with our everlasting happiness, and he's made each one of us exactly as he judges best for our salvation. His desire is that we do his will and live with him forever. We learn that in the Catechism. We learn that God made us to know him, to love him, and to serve him in this life, and to be happy with him forever in the next. And so anytime we look at our lives and try to understand ourselves, we have to think about what God's will for us actually is. God's will is not necessarily that we be feared and respected by all men. God's will is not necessarily that we be the most beautiful person in the room, or the wealthiest person in the town, or the healthiest person. God's will is that we remain close to him. We live humbly, we act justly, and ultimately that we save our souls and live happily with him forever. And if we take the trouble to think about our lives, about every detail of our life, about all of our weaknesses and our strengths, we'll see that they make perfect sense if we think about living a holy life, avoiding sin, and saving our souls. So we can see that this fable of Jupiter and the camel is very helpful in sharing that lesson using the illustrations provided by a camel, Jupiter, and these other animals, the lion, the tiger, the boar, and the bull. We can even see that those animals that the camel compares himself to could be compared to like sinful, violent people who are respected and feared because they're tough and nasty and they seem powerful and strong. But we can think of them as sort of evil animals, not good animals. Whereas the camel is a good animal. God wants us to be good. And we're valuable because we're good. And we're able to do God's will in a way that no other person or animal can. And that's what makes us valuable. So we have a really great moral lesson in the fable of Jupiter and the camel, not just to be content with what we have, which is sort of a worldly message, but to be thoughtful and to understand that what we have and what we don't have were decided by God, who made us just the way we are for his own will, which is our salvation. So I hope that's a helpful look at the fable of Jupiter and the camel. Study it for yourself, complete your lesson assessment, and I look forward to walking through the next fable with you in the next lesson. God bless.